so how do I turn off these elements that I don't want to see in the intersection areas? So the way you can turn those off is by utilizing something called a component display rule. And component display rules are basically just automated instructions detailing when a component should be displayed or undisplayed. So either turned off or turned on. Okay? And it's usually just testing horizontal differences and vertical differences, and slope differences between the various template points to make things turn off. So it's really just based on mathematical operators. So what we're going to do is we'll create some display rules for our components on the right side of our corridor that we want to turn off, and the components on the left side of the corridor that we want to turn off, or the template rather. So let's first zoom in a little bit. You choose your middle mouse wheel to zoom in to the right side of the template here. I'm going to double click on my curb and gutter component. Let's double click on that. You'll see the component properties dialog box appears. And you can see here we have a call out for display rules. There's nothing there, it's kind of empty. And there's an edit button right next to that. Okay, so this is where you come to actually create a display rule, or define a display rule on a component, right? So what we want to do is we want to create a display rule on this curb and gutter that turns it off, right? So we're going to click edit. We're going to define the display rule, so we got to give it a name. So when you click the edit button, you'll see the component display conditional expression dialog appears. And we want to add a new rule. So down here at the bottom, you'll see the add button. Click on add. And you usually want to give the rule a name, right? So try to give it a logical name that makes sense to you. In this case, I'm just going to call it intersection right. Name. Sometimes people will name these based on what they're turning off or on. So that's another way to think about it for the naming. We have different types of display rules here. So as I mentioned, you can do horizontal, absolute horizontal, vertical, absolute vertical, slope, absolute slope, and component is displayed. These are basically just going to be mathematical tests between comparing the position between 2 points, either horizontally or vertically or by a slope. So we're going to utilize just a horizontal display rule. So when we do that, you can see you have between and a and option here. So it's basically set up to test between 2 points. And you have some mathematical operators here. You have your less than, equal to, greater than, equal to, and greater than. Right? So typical mathematical operators everyone's familiar with. So what we want to do is we want to test the location of that int underbar to right point in relation to our center line. So when that int underbar to left point moves to the right, it's going to trigger this display rule to turn off all those components. So it's kind of like magic, I guess, if you will, mathematical template magic. How would you say
Template magic?
Yeah.
I think that's good.
I'm going to call it template magic. Sounds good. Okay. So we're going to be testing the difference between this int to right point first. So I'm going to select that as my first point. So I'm just going to scroll down the list here. You can graphically pick it from the screen using the pick buttons or the target buttons to the right. So my first point is going to be this one, int underscore to right. And then my other point is going to be my centerline point. So I can use the little pickers here and just graphically pick the centerline point. And it'll populate the tool there. Alright, so once we have those set up, that just means it's going to look and see what the horizontal difference is between these 2 points. If it's less than or equal to 0, then it's going to create this special rule that turns off or displays the components, right? So there's my rule. Okay. can see here's the name of the rule, here's the type of the rule, here's the expression, such as int underbar 2 right minus CL, right? And then if it's less than or equal to 0, then it's true. So up here in the upper portion of the dialog, we need to add it to the component. So to add it to the component, you want to select the rule. This gives you the ability to test it, see currently if it's true or false. If it's true, that means the component will be turned on. When it's false, if this conditional expression down here is false, that means the component's going to turn off. Make sense? So just think about it as being turning something off or turning something on. So since the result, we press a little equal sign here, you'll see it says true, even down here it says true. Right now it means it's going to be turned on. We haven't moved any point yet to make it be anything different. Okay, so let's go ahead and click OK on that once that's assigned, and then we can click Apply, and then Component Properties, and then we can close the component properties here. So now we have that display rule created for that curb and gutter. Now, let's test this, right? So you can see what we just did there. So I'm going to go up to my int underscore 2 right point. This is our null point that goes out and seeks our match line. I'm just going to do a quick horizontal test to see what happens as I move this to the far right. Okay, so I'm going to click on that point. I'm going to right click and hold my mouse button. I'm going to go down my menu here to test point controls. I'm going to select test horizontal point control. We're going to move that point all the way over to the right until you see that curb and gutter disappear. See how it disappears?
Curb and gutter.
So as it's evaluating the difference between the center line point and this point, as it goes to the right,
Okay.
it turns off that curb and gutter, right? So, and since this point is seeking this match line element, anytime there's a match line element present, it's just automatically going to turn off the curb and gutter. So that's the template magic. Now, you're going to notice that these other pieces of the template didn't turn off, right? So we need to either assign that same display rule to all these pieces, or if we're smart, we can just use parent-child relationships and kind of make this stuff all associate back to the curb and gutter, which is the parent element, right? So that's what we're going to do next. We're going to come in here, we're going to assign parent-child relationships so that these pieces are associated back to this curb and gutter element that has the display rule on it, so we don't have to go through the process of adding a display rule to each one of these pieces, because that's just too time consuming, right? So we'll just come in here, zoom in a little bit more. You'll notice there's a little grass berm right behind the curb and gutter here, so you can double click on that. You'll notice in the component properties here, we have an option for parent component. So parent component in this case is our curb and gutter, so you can just use the little picker button here. Go and pick the curb and gutter. Now that's associated to the curb and gutter. So if the curb and gutter turns off, guess what? The back of this berm is going to turn off, right? So I'm going to set that so that the parent component is that curb and gutter component. Click apply. I'm going to close. I'm going to go back to my null point here up at the top. I want to test this again just to make sure that it does turn off. So we'll go down to test point controls. Test horizontal point control, and we'll move it. And then now you can see turning off the back of the berm too, right? So what would be the next step to make the other pieces turn off? You utilize that same process. We'll go to the sidewalk, we'll go to the parent component,